Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to start with apologies and saying I'm very sorry. I struggle enough with the English language, but I will struggle through with English today. I apologize I'm not able to speak to you in either Russian or Belarusian. So I'm sure the translators, wherever they are, will make a magnificent job of what I say. So, I'd like to say, as first up, a thank you to IPM Business School and to Belgazprom, the sponsors, for inviting me to Minsk for the first time. It's the first time I've been to Minsk, and it's a wonderful city from what I've seen of it so far. Looking forward to seeing more of it. And it's great to see so many people here today. What is an exciting and new innovation and economic model available to us. So it's great to see the enthusiasm that exists in Belarus for this emerging model of doing business. I work in the UK and I live in Glasgow in Scotland, and I work for a company called Twintangibles. And we are a management consultancy, and what we do is we help organizations create value and innovate and change the way that they do things, but specifically by accessing the crowd economy. And I was asked if I would speak today about some of the emerging trends in the crowd economy. Now, the crowd economy is a very, very broad field, and I've got 20 minutes, 25 minutes to talk to you, so that's a lot to cover in that space. So what I propose to do is talk a little bit about some of the key themes and some of the key challenges, I think, that are existing within accessing and making use of the crowd economy, and using crowdfunding specifically as an example to illustrate my point. But to start off with, what I want to do is set out what we believe the crowd economy consists of. It has different definitions. There are a whole range of ways people describe it. But the things that we would typically include in the crowd economy would be things like, and I'm aware that these are all written in English, so apologies, so I'll read them. Crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, collaborative consumption models, open innovation models, open source models. These are all aspects of the crowd economy as we see it. And it has some very specific and distinctive characteristics that make it different from what went before, and also present tremendous opportunities for us if we can access them and make use of them. And to set out some of those specific characteristics, what I thought I would do was talk about a few of the people that I see as some of the founding fathers that articulated what was different about the crowd economy, so that we have a shared understanding of some of the specific advantages. Now, this gentleman here is Don Tapscott. He's a Canadian, and I know we have got another Canadian in the audience somewhere. There's probably more. But he's a Canadian. He wrote the book Wikinomics and Macro-Wikinomics. Has anybody read this book? Anybody read this book? A couple down the front here. If you, and somebody at the back. Well done, madam. I would say, if you haven't, you should. Because what Don really picked up on was the idea that with the advent of communication technologies, ubiquitously available, cheap, and available to all, give us a capacity to collaborate in ways that were previously not possible, either not technically or physically possible, not economically possible. But by having access to collaborate in this broader way, it really changes the possibilities of what we can achieve. And specifically, it means that the source of value creation often sits outside of the organization rather than in it. And that challenges a lot of our traditional management thinking, because it requires us to enter into different relationships, different power structures, and different negotiations. And I think it's a wonderful example of capturing what is distinctive about the crowd economy. Another guy that's worth looking at is Chris Anderson. Chris Anderson, again, he took an established model in the statistical distribution of the long tail, and used it as a vehicle to explain what was distinctive about some of the transactions that were taking place in the crowd economy. And again, this idea that doing many small transactions at low incremental costs is now possible. And by that being possible, it allows us to enter into new economic models, which again were not previously possible. Now, of course, he would explain things like the rise of Amazon and different retailing models as being exemplars of this. But crowdfunding as well is very much part of that sector. Because in the crowdfunding model, the long tail underpins the idea that people can become involved with a funding situation and in a funding transaction with a very small transaction, which changes the amount of people that can become involved, it changes the risk profile associated with that investment, and it broadens the participation, which brings in a whole range of different motivations and different thinking as to why people should become involved in this activity. And the third and final one, you'll be pleased to know this is the last of the gurus that I'm going to refer to. I'm sure other people would have picked others, but these are some that I think are really important and will inform what I'm talking about today. Joachim Benkler is a professor at Princeton, I believe. And in his work, there's a tremendous, if you don't want to read the entire book, then you can read a paper called Coase's Penguin. I'm going to ask the question again. Anybody here read Coase's Penguin? Yes? Anybody? Am I the only person in the room that has? Right, okay, you've all got homework tonight. You should go and find a copy of Coase's Penguin and read it. Because what Benkler unpacks in that is the idea that there are very many new motivations for people getting involved in the value creation process. And these are different and distinctive to those that had been recognized before. Many of our models and frameworks had been founded in a set of limited motivations that no longer applied because they didn't embrace all of the motivations. And he particularly used the example of the development of open source software as the example to demonstrate his point, hence Coase's Penguin. You'll not be surprised that the penguin he's referring to is Linux, the software. So what we've got then, if we think about the crowd economy, is a different engagement looking external to the organization for value creation with a wider group of people with a different type of relationship with them, not a direct management relationship in many respects. We have a broader number of people doing lots of small things that can assist us in a way that we haven't been able to access before. And on top of that, we also have different motivations for why people are participating in the process. So this means that the crowd economy is distinctive in many, many ways. And as a result of that, it can bring us some very, very specific benefits. And when we talk about crowdfunding, we make the point that it's about a lot more than money. This is not money that is like the money that's gone before. It's different. It comes with additional benefits, additional features. And any of our clients that are thinking about accessing crowdfunding as a source of finance, the first question that we ask them is, why are you doing this? And if their sole reason for doing it is accessing finance, we tell them to think again, because they're missing many of the opportunities that are available. We'll probably say, go to the bank, go to a VC, go to an angel. There's finance available if you're looking for it. What's distinctive about crowdfunding is it brings these additional benefits. So what are some of those additional benefits? There's lots that I could throw in, but a few of them that I've listed here, and again, I apologize, this is all in English, isn't it? I should have thought about this and had it all translated. But some of the things that we can think about is validation. Validation is really, really important. If you run a crowdfunding campaign, particularly in an entrepreneurial startup situation, you're not only sourcing finance, you're validating what you are offering to the marketplace. And so instead of going to a funder with a business plan with numbers in it that are essentially made up, not in any nasty way, but they are essentially best guesses, if you successfully run a crowdfunding campaign, you are validating what you're doing, and you're establishing some accuracy around many of the things that you might be setting out in your plan. So you might be validating the cost of customer acquisition. You might be looking at price pointing. You might be entering into a development process with the product or service development at the same time as funding, and doing all of these things in parallel. Now, these are activities that traditionally, in an entrepreneurial startup, you would do in series. But in a crowdfunding scenario, you can do them all in parallel. So not only does it accelerate the process, it brings all of those additional things. Because we know that people are getting involved for different motivations, it can be very patient money. It can be very quick money. So on a peer-to-peer business lending platform, it's not unusual to be able to go onto the platform, run a campaign, and receive your funds in 14 days. Now, you will not get that from most other funding sources. So lots and lots of distinctive characteristics that are tremendously beneficial and very important. And we always make the point that crowdfunding is rarely the sole source of finance for any organization. But as part of the finance mix, and because of those additional benefits, it's a tremendously valuable source. Oh, there we go. Technology, it floors me every time. So if we think about the scale at which this sector is growing, the statistics are readily available in all sorts of places. So these, just straight from the Mass Solutions report, these are indicative of the continuing global growth in value of crowdfunding at all of its various forms. And there's no evidence to suggest that this is slowing down anytime soon. For all sorts of reasons. One, it's becoming popular. Two, new jurisdictions are adopting crowdfunding models to allow that to take place. So this is growing all the time. And if we were to look at more locally, the European scale, this is a report that came out 2 weeks ago from Cambridge University. This is looking specifically at alternative finance, which is broader than purely crowdfunding, but crowdfunding is a significant component of it. You can see again, continued, sustained growth. So this is something that is not going away, and it's something that is continuing to grow and become progressively a more useful and valuable source of funding. Because as the sums grow, so too does the applicability of the funds. But if we looked at it, as you might expect from a UK perspective, because that's the one I'm probably most familiar with, what you can see here is, again, the sums are becoming significant, but the dominance that we see in the UK is in the lending-based model of crowdfunding. That is the biggest part of the marketplace. And this is a trend, this is something that we will see in crowdfunding all over the world. Wherever you go, you will find that if the lending model is permitted from a regulatory point of view, it rapidly becomes the largest part of the marketplace. And as the UK is a fairly mature, probably the most mature crowdfunding marketplace in the world, you can see that the equity space is in the second placed area there. And I would expect that trend to continue. So let's talk about some of the specifics of some crowdfunding campaigns to flesh out what I've said thus far. Does anybody know who this somebody at the back does? That's a beer drinker at the back. Jolly good. Thumbs up. Very good. These two gentlemen are the founders of a brewery called Brewdog. It's in Scotland, and it is a long way from anywhere. It's in a tiny place called Ellen, up near Aberdeen. And in the past 6 years, they have run 4 equity crowdfunding rounds for their business. Now, bear in mind, 6 years ago, their business was a market stall, brewing beer and selling it from a market stall. They pioneered equity crowdfunding in the world, frankly. And they'd run 4 equity rounds for £26 million. And they are currently now running a 5th equity round in the United States for $50 million to expand into the US market. Now, what's interesting about these guys is how they have used their equity punks, as they call them. So the people that buy equity in Brewdog are called equity punks. Now, I am an equity punk. I am a card-carrying, I brought my card just to prove it. I'm one of the 46,000 equity punks that backed this business. And my investment was less than £100. And I think I got 2 or 4 shares. But I don't care about the valuation of the business. I don't care about dividends. I don't care if they're going to go for an IPO and I can sell my shares at some massive profit. I really don't care, because this card gives me 10% off Brewdog beer. And that is my return. That is my unconventional return. And as a result, I'm never going to sell those shares. It's an incredibly stable investment for Brewdog. And 46,000 of their shareholders are much the same as me. So this is not the only source of funding that they've got, but it's a very specific type of funding. And they draw upon these equity partners in lots of ways. They crowdsource the location of their bars. Why not? Why wouldn't you ask the people that are going to drink in it which bar to go to, where you want it? They crowdsource new product ideas. So they really understand the specific benefits that go with crowdfunding. I usually explain that I de-risk my investment in the pub. So, another example, oh dear, I keep pressing the wrong button. There we go. Another smaller example, but nevertheless one that sets out some specific characteristics that are emerging in the crowdfunding space. This is an Irish-based company, Thermotent. They have a specific type of tent which is insulated for sound and temperature. They ran a crowdfunding campaign, and as you can see, it was in euros because they're an Irish-based business. They did it on Kickstarter, so it was a reward-based campaign. They were a young company, and they had been trying to get access to distribution and retail in the United States and had failed to get it. They couldn't get any traction in the US at all. As a result of this campaign, which is a fairly modest campaign, 50,000 euros, they identified that 50% of the people that had backed it were from the US, and they used that to immediately, and I mean immediately, open up new distribution and retail opportunities in the USA. So this quickly gave them access to things that was not available to them before. So they used the crowdfunding campaign to effectively do that. They then moved onto an equity campaign because they had validated what they're doing. They had expanded the value of the firm by getting those distribution deals. And within a few months of their Kickstarter, they ran an equity campaign in the UK. So you see the currency has changed this time to sterling. Sold a minor part, a moderate part of their equity, and underpinned some further growth. But they've done even more than that. They now run crowdfunding campaigns as they launch new products to the market. So this is a fairly recent campaign. And what's distinctive about this is they're now working in dollars. So you see how they have moved through the different currencies there. And they've set a very modest target here, 20,000 euros, very modest. But if you can see, I don't know if this has got a, no. Oh yeah, maybe. No, my laser doesn't work. But you can see that they have made $160,000 already. So this is not about actually raising money. It is about proofing this new product in the marketplace, raising awareness and driving that sort of engagement. So they're very astute at understanding how to make use of the opportunity. So, all good examples, but I have to say, is there something we should be worried about? Should we be frightened by what's going on in this? Because these are all good examples. And I think there are a few things that we need to worry about. And I think if we look at the crowdfunding space, generally, the areas that we need to see some areas of concern are in the lending and equity space. And I want to use these as an example to set out some of the other concerns that I have in the crowd economy. Now, the lending and equity space in crowdfunding are those that look most like traditional finance. And of course, in the last couple of years, we've seen a few failures. So TrustBuddy went into liquidation. Lending Club has had some very public challenges. Now, my Chinese is terrible as well. So Zubao, I don't know whether that's good or bad, was shown to be nothing but a fraud. And we've had some failures in equity crowdfunding. So Rebus Group is a quite high-profile equity crowdfunding failure, where the investors lost their money. But if they had stuck to crowdfunding principles and made their investment a tiny one, then actually their risk exposure would have been relatively minor. and not necessarily tragic. And in fact, failures are all part of business. So as the market grows and matures, I kind of expect to see failures. So these things in themselves don't necessarily concern me particularly. But this sort of stuff does. Again, it's in English, I apologize. But 26%, this comes from a recently produced report, 26% of peer-to-peer business loans were funded by institutional investors last year. Institutional investors. It's not the crowd, this is institutional money. And this is something that is growing very, very rapidly. Institutional money is flowing onto these platforms. Now, that in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. I welcome flows of new capital onto these platforms. But it depends on how it works. So I have taken stats from one of the UK's biggest peer-to-peer lenders and done a little bit more analysis of that. So 26% is the average across Europe, okay? This large lender, who will remain unnamed, started trading in 2010, and you can see through that period, through to 2016, you'll find that the sums that they have raised have gone up considerably. But in 2014, they started to welcome institutional investors on the platform. And you can see up to that point, the average number of lenders per loan was growing. So the crowd was very much, these were crowd loans. And the size of each individual exposure was declining. So, sticking to crowdfunding principles and the philosophical underpinnings of risk mitigation. If that's for me, I'll take it later. But dig into those a little bit more, you can see that from 2014 onwards, those trends are reversed. So the average number of lenders is declining, the average exposure of each investor is going up. So we're introducing risk into this. And on this larger platform, 55% of all of their loans are single lender loans. That is not crowdfunding by any shape or form. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? Maybe not, but it does actually expose other participants to risk. And it also means that those that are receiving the investments, the investees, are losing out on some of the additional value that we know we can get from crowdfunding. So what else can we have a look at that is a concern? I think this is a concern. 38% of business loans now funded by automatic selection or automatic bidding. This is machine trading. This isn't crowdfunding. This isn't peer-to-peer engagement. This is machine trading. Securitization. So we can find lenders in the UK now starting to issue securitized instruments based on their lending book, their loans book. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing in itself, but I think it's taking us back to this. It's looking more and more like traditional capital. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with traditional capital, except we know what happened in 2008. And more importantly to me, the investees are not receiving the maximum benefit that's available to them because they are not sticking to crowd economy principles. And this is my assertion. If the crowd economy simply becomes a reflection of what has gone before, we are losing its true benefits and its true value. We're missing the opportunity. And it's something that we need to caution against. So, what can we do? What can be done? Is there anything that we can do? And I just want to set out a few things that I think we should bear in mind. Some people, the conspiracy theorists amongst us, might say that this is actually a big conspiracy. It's big capital taking it all back and that they're just seeing their chance and ripping us all off. Now, I think there may be some of that, but I actually think the main driver is that working in the crowd economy is hard. It's really difficult. It requires different skills, different competencies, and different approaches. And it's easier for most people to simply fall back on what they know. So they fall back on their models, their frameworks, the thinking that's gone before, because it's easy. So we should always remember that working in the crowd is tough, and remind ourselves of that. But I think there's a role for education as well. I think if more people participating in the marketplace understood the specific differences and the opportunities and advantages that are available in the crowd economy, that they would protect it through their own actions. So the crowd would actually be regulating this to a certain extent. But that will only happen if all of the participants are sufficiently educated as to what is different about the crowd economy. I also think we need to learn new skills and new models. I think most of our thinking, most of our models, most of our management thinking is essentially still based in the old economy rather than the crowd economy, and there is a real role for business schools and entrepreneurial training and mentoring to assist people in making sure that they have the necessary skills and competencies to operate in this, and we'll develop new ones. This is all new. We're learning all the time. There are new commercialization models that we can make use of, lots of new thinking and new developments, many of which will be explored over the next couple of days in this conference. And finally, regulation. Regulation is a significant challenge and problem here. Regulation is used in many areas as a defensive measure by incumbents in the marketplace to defend their position. And regulation reflects what's gone before. It's constructed to actually serve the old economy models. We need new regulation which enables the crowd economy to function effectively. And we need to educate the regulators to understand. I could tell you endless stories about dealing with regulators who have not a clue when it comes to the crowd economy. But if we do those things, then I think there is a chance that crowd assets can be the new source of innovation and enduring economic value. If we don't do those things, and if we don't think about it now at the early stage, then I think there is a danger that we may miss the tremendous opportunity that the crowd economy gives us. Thank you very much for your attention.